You're watching Central.
I felt that if Yvonne could be deceived without being hurt, that might be the best thing to do.
For days and days, I just felt, this isn't happening to me. This can't be happening to me. And I knew then that because there was going to be a child, that the relationship, would never end.
Apart from the certainty of death, the most likely events in your life are that you'll get married and you'll get divorced. Over 1/3 of all marriages end in divorce within 17 years. Another 20 to 25% end in legal or informal separation. And an awful lot of other relationships are empty husks in which nothing is happening. The economic price of breakups to the nation is put at well over £1,000 million a year in legal costs, housing and social welfare benefits, as well as, of course, a great deal of social dislocation, particularly where children are concerned. People involved in breakups are more prone to illness, both physical and psychological. More get involved in accidents, and absenteeism from work increases dramatically. But perhaps worst of all is the hurt and the anguish which often lasts years after the event. Now, I believe that a major reason for this hurt and anguish is that despite the colossal amount of research that's been done on marital breakup, each of us, in the course of the breakup, have to find our own way through this frightening and confusing jungle. So what I want to do is to provide us with a map through this jungle. So what is this map? It starts off with each of us as the partner and what we take into our relationship. And as the relationship begins to develop, how do we change? How does that relationship change? And as it begins to go out of gear, how do we try to re-establish a balance between ourselves? And when that doesn't work, we get into a spiral in which we attribute a lot of blame to each other, we have an awful lot of conflict, and we fail to communicate. And then depending on what happens to us, sooner or later we call it a day and we break up. Let's now look at Peter and Yvonne, to whom this happened. They met in a small Midlands town when he was 27 and she was 18. At that time he was training in the curacy and she was finishing at school. Yvonne went on to qualify as a teacher and they married 4 years later. They now have 3 children, the youngest of whom is just a year old.
I had quite an input of Christian moral teaching, which very clearly said to me, thou shalt not commit fornication. So in my relationships with the various girlfriends I had in my late teens and through my 20s, there was, yes, some physical experience, but short of intercourse.
I think I expected to sort of work for 2 or 3 years and then start a family and then stop work and bring up children. Peter was a curate at the time, but I expected him to go on into a parish. And I quite look forward to the prospect of being a clergyman's wife and all that entailed.
I suppose I felt that I needed someone who could fulfil that particular role, because clergy wives, are rather peculiar creatures and are expected to do all sorts of odd things, usually for nothing. And so I think it was important to me that I had someone who could fulfill that role.
The novelty of sex seemed to wear off on Peter's side fairly quickly, and perhaps we didn't have sex as frequently as I hoped that we would. And I think he's got perhaps a lot of problems going right back to his upbringing, the religious input that he'd had. In
my early teens, I had had a homosexual relationship with an older man, which had lasted probably for 2 or 3 years. And I cared very much for him and he for me. And that has had, I think, a profound effect on me.
He was, I think, quite prepared to go through life in a state of celibacy. I think he could have done that, or at least he convinced me that he could do that. But I came from a family where there was a lot of affection, and I just think that I need that. And to me, sex was a way of expressing that. And not to have it made me feel very rejected and unloved. And I think I got in quite a state because I felt, well, there must be something wrong with me.
I don't know how sexual a person I am, in all truth. I think I feel that people vary an awful lot in how sexual they are. Now, I think, looking back, that those early experiences of mine had really quite a profound effect on my ability to express myself sexually. I don't know whether I was repressed or inhibited or what sort of word to use, but there was something, I think, that somehow prevented my being as free with my wife in a sexual way as I would have hoped.
I know Peter found it very difficult to actually talk about sex to me. He got quite embarrassed, I think, and felt it wasn't a thing that should be talked about.
I think things had gone quite remarkably smoothly during the early years of our marriage. I had made a change of career. I had come out of the full-time clergy and had trained for social work, and I think Yvonne had gone along with that and accepted that quite happily. She had been working as a teacher, and we'd had 2 children in a very planned and organised way, one of each sex. And things really did go very smoothly. I very often used to look around me at other people with problems and think, well, why on earth, have things gone so right?
I don't think there were any other major difficulties, and I think we were very good in the way that we communicated over other matters, over money, and we did communicate very well about a lot of things, the state of the world, and we shared a lot of the same views on aspects. But it was just the sex bit, that he felt he couldn't really communicate, or didn't want to. Perhaps he didn't think it mattered. After Sophie was born, he really, I think, made it quite clear that it wasn't important at all that he had sex. We'd abstained for most of the pregnancy. And several weeks after Sophie had been born, and I was again sort of fit enough, and I told him that I was fit enough again, he said, "Oh, not tonight, I'm too tired." And to me, after sort of months of abstinence, that seemed to be rather a cruel thing to say.
I felt that, something had gone out of my marriage in terms of freshness and sparkle. The job which I had enjoyed so much doing and had found so fulfilling just didn't seem to offer quite what it had done.
After I'd gone back to work full-time, I felt it easier to cope with the sexual situation or the non-sexual situation by sort of throwing myself into work and other people, making friends, and really sort of regaining some of the independence that I'd had before I'd had the children.
In the autumn of 81, someone, walked into my office seeking some counselling help, and that became something very special. Now, obviously, lots of things have happened since then, And I hope, and I tried to be professional in my dealings with this particular person. But her marriage was in a mess, and I think in reality was dead by the time we had met. But we talked about it, and I hope that in that particular period I was totally professional in trying to look at her marital situation and discuss it all. In the following months, Chris and I became friends, and I think it was a mutual thing that came about. We had seen in each other something which we wanted, and over a period of time, Chris and I became so close that I think we just felt that we wanted to express that care and love that we felt for each other in a physical way. And we did. And that was, I think, but a small part of the relationship during those months of 82. But it just seemed to work. And it was good. And I enjoyed it. And I found myself feeling much less inhibited with Chris, I think, than I did with my wife of so many years. And I think we fell in love, whatever that means. But there was a very, very deep feeling for each other during those months. There really was.
Peter had moved down south for 3 months on his own, leaving me to sell the house and finish off the term. And he was only coming home, I suppose, every 3-4 weeks at the weekends. So I was opening all the posts. And one day I opened a letter to him, which was, I felt sure, from a woman. It was very brief, and the first part and the last part, in fact, were in shorthand. But the contents of the letter were obviously trying to arrange a meeting in Brighton during the summer. And I took the letter with me to school and asked someone who did shorthand to translate the beginning and the end. And it was just Dear Peter at the beginning, and With Love from Chris at the end. And I didn't know anyone called Chris. There was no one in our sort of acquaintance of that name. And I was immediately suspicious that something was going on that I hadn't known about. And it wasn't till Peter came home the next weekend that I actually confronted him with the letter.
And I played down at that stage the significance of what had happened between Chris and myself. And I don't think I was being too dishonest in doing that, because I think I genuinely believed that it was over, and that perhaps it was best that, least said, the better.
So I thought, well, it's just one of those little indiscretions, and really tried to put it out of my mind. But after we moved, in fact, the next day, there was a telephone call, and this woman had, in fact, gone to Brighton and had made her way to the village where we lived, and was ringing up to ask Peter to go and see her. And Peter was really very cross on the phone and said, no, we're unpacking, we're going on holiday in a couple of days' time, and we haven't got time. I can't come and see you. Even invited me to go and speak to her on the phone. And I said, no, I don't want to talk to her. And that was that. We went off on holiday. And I think because of the way he had spoken to her on the telephone, I really thought there wasn't anything serious in this. I trusted Peter, and I believed what he'd said. I don't even think I was particularly angry. I was angry, I think, when she telephoned. I was angry with her, I think, for trying to pursue Peter. But I really did believe that it didn't mean anything to him at all.
I think I thought it was all over. I think I really did. We moved finally to this house in Sussex, and within a very few weeks of our arrival there, strange things began to happen to me, and it was the beginning of a depressive illness, quite a major nervous breakdown.
He was taken into a psychiatric unit where he spent about 4 weeks. And really, through very large doses of drugs, he improved rapidly over that 4 weeks. Now, it's before he actually came out of hospital that he had been having various counselling sessions with doctors there. And gradually I was brought in on these sessions. And it wasn't until then that I, in fact, found out that the affair that he had been having was of a lot more serious nature than I'd thought. And I think he'd been perfectly honest with the doctors in the hospital. And it came as a great shock to me because he told them all about it. And I think they had assumed that I knew about it. And in fact, I didn't. And that was a terrible thing. It was such a shock.
As I recovered from that illness, and I did recover, there was a need for me to recontact Chris because she seemed important.
He said he was attracted to her because she was an interesting person and very intelligent, and they could talk and communicate well. And all the time I felt, well, so can we. And what has she got that I haven't? And I think the answer was, well, I'm not married to her.
I couldn't let go of Chris after the thing had restarted, and communicating with her only via letters and phone calls, not by physical contact. And I felt that I didn't want to lose Yvonne. She was my pop. She had been this marvellous wife to me. Now, perhaps that was being a swine, I don't know. But I wanted somehow to keep the two things going, not knowing how it was going to work out.
She didn't seem to be much of a threat because, she was nearly 200 miles away. And I kept feeling, well, people can't carry on an affair at that distance. And it's got to fade eventually.
I felt that if Yvonne could be deceived without being hurt, that might be the best thing to do. Chris had conceived in the previous July and had simply chosen not to tell me. Not to tell me. She had told a close friend of mine, and perhaps she thought that this friend would tell me. In fact, he didn't. Not until 10 days before the child was born. It
just began to feel, as a bad dream I was having, and but I'd wake up and find it all was just a nightmare. And I was just, totally devastated. And for days and days, I just felt, this isn't happening to me. This can't be happening to me. And I knew then that because there was going to be a child, that the relationship, would never end. And I just felt sort of terrible fear for the future. And didn't know what was going to happen.
When I first heard, I was just absolutely stunned. Absolutely stunned. And there was a great mixture of emotions. Selfishly, I thought, what will this do for my marriage, my job? But there was, alongside those feelings of sort of fear and wondering, a pride, a real pride that this woman, who I'd loved and perhaps had not stopped loving, had chosen to bear my son.
And I became very depressed. And I actually took an overdose of tablets a few weeks later. Because I just didn't feel that could cope with the future anymore.
I remember, when she took that overdose, being almost sort of coldly calculating in thinking, oh yes, well, what she's taken is not dangerous. I will get the doctor in, and he did come. And on that occasion, she didn't have to go into hospital, but she slept virtually for 3 days, and I knew, that she wasn't going to die or anything, and it really wasn't going to do any lasting damage. But I think I was pretty cool about it, looking back. Pretty cool about it.
And I think for the first time, Peter was really faced with a decision that he got to make. And I don't really know what he felt at that time. But he did write to Chris and said that, no, he wasn't going to leave me.
I wrote a kind letter. But I said to her, I think I'm going to stay with Yvonne. And I still don't know now whether that was the right letter to have written.
And Chris took that very badly. And from then on, things got very bad for Peter. And she took him to court for affiliation proceedings. And that in turn, that court appearance was reported to his former employers in Staffordshire. And they relayed it to his employers in East Sussex. And the last 12 months we've been through, or he's been through absolute hell, because he's had his career destroyed as a result of that. I said, you'll have to go. I can't bear this anymore. And again, I really threw him out. And he packed all his clothes into the car the next day and went to stay with his mother in Somerset. But I still felt very miserable and I felt very lonely. And I missed his company. I missed having him around. Funny enough, I didn't miss sex at all. And I think as a result of those weeks apart, I really felt, that perhaps that wasn't as important as I thought it had been. But I really felt convinced that Peter wouldn't ever come back to that house. He went for a job interview and again didn't get it, and for him I think that seemed to be the sort of last straw, and he was so sort of devastated that he rang me up and really begged me on the phone, can I come home? I'm so unhappy.
She has stood by me when many a woman, I think, would have thrown her husband out. I think Yvonne loves me very much. For whatever reason, I don't know, but I think she does.
But you see, I know that if I actually did throw him out again, if he did go away again, I would still be very unhappy. And I really don't want that to happen. Because I know I'm miserable without him. I think I must love him so much that I'm prepared to put up with all sorts of things in the hope that it'll get better in the future.
You remember I told you it was a jungle, and so it turned out. But I promise you we'll find our way through it. In the next program, we'll explore the South. What is it that makes you and I what we are? So join me again next week for Why Couples Break Up.
A free booklet explaining the stages of breakup and including helpful addresses accompanies this series. Please send 2 second-class stamps and your address to Why Couples Break Up, Yorkshire Television, Leeds, LS3 1JS.
Stephanie Beecham as Connie, and she's strutting her stuff and trampling on all and sundry next on Central.